Have you spent enough time playing or thinking about the 5th edition of D&D to know what implementation and combination of rules will almost certainly break the game? Yeah, me too. And even if that isn't, you just know that time breaks all things. Also, there just happens to be a subclass that obsesses over time and flagrantly breaking the rules and spirit of the game. Let's have a chat about the CHRONURGY WIZARD. Hi there, I'm just a second level fighter who likes talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and if you've ever felt that an official character option may just be a tad too powerful to use in a serious game, then please consider leaving a like or hitting the subscribe button. But enough about that, cause today we're taking a look at a time-themed wizard, and yeah, I honestly believe it's kind of broken. The CHRONURGY WIZARD was released as one of 3 very special subclasses in the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, a book based on the area of Exandria covered in the 2nd season of Critical Role, a campaign that I personally have quite a deep connection to. However, unlike the other 2 subclasses, the CHRONURGY WIZARD doesn't suffer from the same confusing rules writing mostly, and it is definitely the strongest. Now, regardless of what you think about Critical Role or the execution of the Wildemount book, the idea of a wizard that studies time itself is an incredibly powerful narrative hook. The archetype sits near the pinnacle of arcane power and ambition, just beneath ascending to godhood, Vecna style. Time is a finite resource that holds back everyone. However, if your wizard can find a way around that little biological limiter, they could hypothetically keep on studying, learning, and accruing knowledge and power essentially forever. Turning to the potential downside of this class, if you believe that something like the Twilight Domain Cleric is overpowered, then you're probably going to have some very choice thoughts about the CHRONURGY WIZARD. We'll get into it, but I will say that if you are planning on either playing one or letting one of your players play one, proceed with caution. Anyway, let's dive in and see what's ticking with this subclass. I have included an example build at the end to show off just exactly what can go wrong if you get a bit creative with some of the features, and a particularly problematic 4th level spell that comes in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Starting from a mechanical perspective, let's take a look at the subclass features, kicking it off with the 2 we get at 3rd level when we unlock this subclass. Chronal Shift is basically one of the most comprehensive and powerful iterations of forcing rerolls in 5th edition. As a reaction, when a creature within 30 feet of you, including yourself, makes a d20 test, you can force them to reroll after seeing whether the result would be a success or a failure, and you can do so twice per long rest. There are many reroll mechanics in D&D, and the overwhelming majority of them do not allow you to see whether the result is a success or failure before using them. So we're starting off incredibly strong here with this feature. But I will also mention that the flavor here is that you are literally rewinding time, which is undeniably cool. Additionally, whenever you re-roll a d20 roll, if you originally had advantage or disadvantage, the re-roll is made under the same conditions. This feature also allows you to let everyone use their roll-altering abilities first, before sniping out the roll and potentially negating them. It is a really good feature. You also get a little feature at 3rd level called Temporal Awareness that lets you add your intelligence modifier to initiative rolls just like the War Wizard. This is just great to have, and if you're willing to use some of the Dunamancy spells added in the same book this came from, you can boost your initiative rolls to some pretty decent levels. Another very flavorful feature that embodies the focus on time and your ability to manipulate its flow. At 6th level, we get Momentary Stasis. This feature lets you trap a creature outside of time. You use your action to force a larger or smaller creature within 60 feet of you to succeed on a Constitution saving throw or become incapacitated and have their speed reduced to 0 until the end of your next turn or until the creature takes any damage. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier per long rest too. This feature is once again pretty flavorful, however the con save does trip it up somewhat, and as a wizard, using your action on spells is generally the best possible thing to do. That being said, if it works, it is kind of devastating. Although at the same level, Hypnotic Pattern does exactly the same thing on many more targets, for potentially much longer, and with a much less resisted saving throw. As we move on, however, you'll notice that this is the only questionably effective feature. Then, at 10th level, we get one of the most problematic features in the entire edition. Arcane Abeyance allows you to freeze a spell in time and store it in a small mote that can be carried around and eventually activated to release said spell. When you cast a spell using a 4th level spell slot or lower, you can use this feature to condense it into a small grey bead that has an AC of 15 and a single hit point, and is immune to psychic and poison damage. The bead lasts for 1 hour, and you can only use this feature once per short or long rest. There are very few limitations here, and the spell you cast with this feature can have any casting time or be from any source you have that lets you cast it with a spell slot. It doesn't even need to be a wizard spell. And then, of course, no matter what, it can be simply released as an action and doesn't require the creature releasing the spell to produce any of the components whatsoever, because you already did that. Meaning the creature only needs to be able to take an action, and true sentience is quite frankly optional. They count as the caster for all other purposes of the spell, and they have to concentrate on it if the spell requires. Otherwise, it uses your spell attack modifier and saving throw DC. So, there are many applications of this feature, anything from allowing your allies or familiar to cast clutch spells, to virtually achieving double concentration through your familiar. I get the feeling this feature was intended to pass a spell around the party, and you can absolutely do that, but why waste your fighter friend's action when you can just use your familiars instead? Just note that your familiar has its own initiative and you might have to do some readying of spells and releasing them once the familiar goes. You will also have to have prepared this feature before combat, or you're going to have to waste your first turn using it. Double concentration is the most obviously broken application here, and yeah, it isn't true double concentration, but using your familiar you can abuse the action economy in pretty much the same way. There are a lot of combos, and we will touch on a few later. Now, this feature is very similar to the Artificer's spell storing item, a ring of spell storing, and of course in spelled items. However, Artificers are currently limited to second level Artificer spells, but not in the UA, and we saw the problems that caused, and the magic items are gated behind a DM. There are no guardrails when it comes to the Chronunergy Wizard, however. Finally, we get our capstone feature at 14th level, Convergent Future. Once again, this is a particularly strong ability. You can use a reaction whenever a creature within 60 feet of you makes a d20 test. Instead of rolling, you can choose for the result to be exactly the number needed or one less than that. In other words, you can choose for the result to succeed or fail without allowing for a roll. In other words, you eliminate the element of randomness from a dice-based system. Once you use this feature, you gain a point of exhaustion, and you can only get rid of it through a long rest. So yeah, thanks to the 2024 PHB, using this feature a few times in quick succession isn't going to severely handicap your character. You cannot use magical means to get rid of the exhaustion unless you wish for a few long rests. Now, we have some issues here. I mentioned earlier that this subclass doesn't suffer from the strange writing decisions made for its sister subclasses, but this feature does kinda lean into that grey area a bit. It's not clear whether this feature takes things like proficiency bonus or ability scores into account for the purposes of choosing the minimum required number for a roll. Even more unclear is dynamic bonuses from effects like Guidance, Bane, or Bless. More than that is the number it sets the roll to restrained by the actual limit of a d20. What I mean is, if you roll on something theoretically impossible, like making an ability check with a DC of 30 but even a roll of 20 wouldn't result in success, would this feature set your result to something higher than 20 to make it a success? Or would this feature do nothing in that case? Who knows? The Wildmount book left us with many unanswered questions, and this is just one of them. Regardless, Convergent Future is incredibly powerful if given a functional interpretation. Right, so what does this subclass actually do? Well, it is intensely flavorful. You can't really fault it there. From speeding yourself up to freezing other creatures and even spells in time to literally rewinding time for a more favorable outcome. This is a time wizard and it feels like one. However, mechanically speaking, this subclass does things that player characters just shouldn't be able to do. Double concentration being at the top of the list. Yes, the 4th level spell slot thing and the fact that there are 2 instances of concentration that can pretty easily be broken are limiting factors. But did you know that you can either hide your familiar in a backpack or just straight up bamf them into a pocket plane while they maintain their concentration? Beyond that, even just having a familiar running around that can release something like a 4th level cure wounds that you got through Magic Initiate, or rock out a Leomund's tiny hut in the middle of combat is absurd. Then there's the dice fixing aspect. This subclass has both the strongest version of forced rerolls and a feature that literally dictates whether a roll succeeds or fails. The Divination Wizard can eat their little heart out, I guess. D&D is a dice game at its core, and removing the random element kinda goes against the spirit of that. So yeah, the Chronunergy Wizard is more than kinda broken. It is problematic in a way that all other subclasses just cannot be. Obviously, as a player, you can choose to use your features, spells, and abilities in a way that won't break the game, but limiting yourself to 5% of the subclass's potential doesn't sound particularly fun. If you are someone that bans certain player options in your games, this should be pretty near the top of the list. If you are allowing this though, proceed with caution. I am fairly confident that this subclass could hold its own as a monoclassed wizard in a Gestalt game. Oh, and one other thing. Do not give a Chronergy Wizard a ring of spell storing and seriously consider depriving them of any enspelled items. They can create an infinite chain of familiars using an enspelled staff or weapon with Find Familiar in it, and then weaponize the second familiar in the chain using a ring of spell storing to achieve triple concentration. The 2024 rules allow for some truly unhinged shenanigans with this subclass. With all that said and done, what type of decisions would I suggest when building a Chronergy Wizard? Well, if you're going to be slinging your wizard spells, then you need to focus on pumping your intelligence. You can also do some interesting Alpha Strike type nonsense by having a decent dexterity score to boost your initiative rolls. I would suggest taking or finding spells that work in combination with each other for when you reach level 10 if you are going to play at that level. We'll cover a few options shortly. Don't neglect the general wizard selection of spells like Mage Armor, Shield, and anything else that helps you stay alive though. Survivability is your one and only weakness. Also take Find Familiar. You have a very good reason to have one once you reach level 10. Then, if you are playing this subclass, consider checking with your DM if you can take some of the Dunamancy spells included in the Wildmount book. They aren't too powerful and they have some interesting flavor, particularly the Chronergy themed ones. As for feats, there isn't anything too special here. Any options like Fey and Shadow Touched or the Magic Initiate Origin feat can give you some more spell versatility. I already mentioned Cure Wounds to create an emergency ambulance familiar, but I'm sure that there are some other amazing options too. Getting proficiency in Constitution saves with the Resilient feat is always great on a wizard, particularly one that has some gross combo potential. Then Alert can be used to further dip into the I go first always lifestyle. You can also use it to swap places in the initiative order with your own familiar if they rolled badly and you need them to release their spell first and you don't want to risk holding your own spell until they do so. For species, you can really do whatever you want. But the Bugbear has some potential synergy with the high initiative leaning build with its surprise attack feature that adds an extra 2d6 damage to any creature you hit that hasn't yet taken a turn. Scorching Ray is a lot scarier when each ray does 4d6 damage. However, I really like the concept of having a timeless creature or construct as your Chronergy Wizard, something like a Reborn, Warforged, or even Autognome. Assuming you don't die bloody like the rest of your adventuring buddies, you'll have the rest of forever to study and learn. Alright, let's cover a few things to keep in mind when choosing specific spells, as well as a few nasty spell combinations you can pull off using Arcane Abeyance and a Familiar. Firstly, there are 4 Chronergy-themed Dunamancy spells from the Wildmount book. Gift of Alacrity lets you add a d8 to a creature's initiative rolls, hence all the talk about boosting initiative. You can kinda just go first if you really wanted to. Temporal Shunt is like the estranged love child of Counterspell and Banishment. You can use it when a creature makes an attack or casts a spell, and you can basically banish them until the start of their next turn. Reality Break forces a creature to witness every single timeline colliding all at once, and is like Super Confusion that can deal damage to the target. And Time Ravage is a 9th level spell that ages its target to the point where they have 30 days left to live. It's pretty nasty. You don't even necessarily need to be playing within the Exandria setting to use these, but always just check with your DM first. I can't imagine they'd say no if they are allowing this subclass in a game. Secondly, if you're making it to level 10, you may want to consider a handful of oddly specific concentration spells that are 4th level or lower. The kinds you want should be able to be comboed with other spells of a similar level or even higher, which we'll cover now. Finally, you want Find Familiar. I do like the idea of a wizard that has no time for such trivialities and companionship, but this is absolutely not that wizard. Your familiar is so much more than that too in this case. So, here is a pretty limited list of a few double concentration combos you can pull off with this subclass. Unless there is a specific gimmick, the general idea is to overlap area of effects or battlefield control spells. Each combo must include one 4th level or lower spell though, which your familiar will release and concentrate on. The simplest example is casting 2 wall spells and trapping a group of enemies in the middle, something like Wall of Fire and maybe Wall of Stone. Combining Wall of Force and any damage over time area of effect spell is exceptionally brutal too. My favorite instance here is having your familiar release Sickening Radiance, a Xanathar spell, and then trapping some poor souls in with a Wall of Force. Both spells last 10 minutes and escape is almost impossible. If the radiant damage doesn't get them, then the rolling exhaustion will. It's like trapping someone inside a room with a nuclear core. Evard's Black Tentacles is a very similar case as it restrains all targets and holds them in place. Then a fun one, taking Tense's Transformation, another Xanathar spell, and combining it with Haste can turn you into a very competent martial combatant. You could also sub in Tasha's Otherworldly Guise here from Tasha's Cauldron if you want to fly or use your intelligence score for weapon attacks, but you will deal significantly less damage. Summoning two different creatures is also pretty awesome. You can have your familiar controlling something like an aberration or elemental while you control something stronger like a fiend, but you do need to find a way around the verbal command issue here. I haven't quite figured it out yet in full, but there has to be a way to get a familiar to talk. Maybe make a creature that can mimic phrases like a crow or a raven. A more reliable method is to have only one summon, but then you use your familiar to buff it up with haste or greater invisibility. It's all fun and games until you summon a fiend or dragon that makes an extra attack and zips around like Sonic the Hedgehog, or is just straight up invisible and has advantage on all attack rolls. A very strange alternative to that combo is to buff up an enemy and then dominate them in an attempt to turn them into the blender. The potential here is truly immense. Okay, so let's build one of these baddies. I am going to do something a bit different here to lean into a one-turn Nova type build, and so this will be a multi-classed character, but only after level 10. Up until that point, it will just be a Chronergy Wizard with some oddly spread ability scores. So, starting out as a wizard, we'll choose the custom lineage from Tasha's Cauldron as our species. This will let us pick up a feat for free. The list of feats that don't have leveled prerequisites is quite small, but we'll be taking the Eldritch Adept feat from the same book. Using that, we'll pick up the Pact of the Blade invocation from the Warlock class in one of the most blatant examples of mixing 2024 rules and older content. Now we can summon a weapon and use our charisma to make attacks with it. Hooray! I'll explain that part a little bit later. For ability scores, we want 15 intelligence, 14 charisma, and 13 dexterity using the standard array. The other three ability scores aren't too consequential here. I would suggest not having your constitution sit at 8 though, maybe make that one 12. We'll boost our intelligence by 2 and our charisma by 1 using a custom background while picking up the alert origin feat. We're not really going to be building for maximum initiative here, but I still overvalue this feat and I like taking it when I'm not sure what else to grab. I'm not too phased about what skills to take here, and it really does come down to what you want your wizard to be able to do outside of combat encounters. Intelligence skills are generally recommended, but with where this is going, picking up persuasion or deception might not be such a bad idea. So how does it play? Well, up until level 11, you're just a Chronergy Wizard with high charisma and a packed weapon. Then things are gonna start getting weird. I'll quickly break down the spread of the multi-class. We want 10 levels of Chronergy Wizard for Arcane Abeyance, double concentration, and a very specific 4th level spell. Then we want a single level of Warlock for Eldritch Blast and the Agonizing Blast invocation, hence the high charisma. Then we want to take 6 levels of Bard and pick up the Valor subclass so that we can get an extra attack and can replace one of our weapon attacks with a cantrip whenever we take the attack action. Finally, we want 2 levels of Fighter to get access to my favorite ability in the game, Action Surge. After that, we have a single level left, and I've opted for a 3rd level in Fighter and taken the Eldritch Knight subclass. You could take another level in any of the pure spellcasting classes here. We just need to have the same spell slot progression as a 17th level spellcaster. This gives us a 9th level spell slot, which is very important. As for our feats, using this spread of classes in this order only gives us 3, one at level 4, 8, and 15. We very simply want to use the first 2 to pump our intelligence and charisma up to 18 each, as we will be using both for damage dealing. And with the 3rd feat we will be taking Metamagic Adept from Tasha's Cauldron. Using that we'll pick up the quickened metamagic option to be able to cast a spell as a bonus action once per adventuring day. Now, you could change up the order you take these classes in, but this works pretty well and gives you a character that feels functional from the start up until the point you unlock the Gross Supernova turn. I will just say that survivability may be an issue here. Also, the vague story is that our Chronergy wizards saw value in spending their time outside of wizardly pursuits in order to gain a silly level of power. So, what can this Frankenstein of a multi-class do once it reaches level 20? Well, it can go supernova in a single turn and do some truly apocalyptic damage, and this time I'm really not being hyperbolic at all. It requires some setup to do, and there is a bit of an order of operations, but first we'll need a setup round to cast Conjure Minor Elementals as a 9th level spell due to its obscenely aggressive upcasting potential, taking it from 2d8 extra damage per attack to 12d8. Then our familiar will release a haste on us to give us an extra action. So now the objective is to see how many attacks we can make. On the turn where we do decide to delete whatever the DM has placed in front of us, we're going to cast Scorching Ray using an 8th level spell slot so that it shoots out 9 rays. We'll be doing so as a bonus action thanks to Quicken Spell. Then we'll take the attack action and use Action Surge to take it again. Each will give us 2 weapon attacks with the Pact Weapon Greatsword because it is the weapon with the highest average damage, and we'll replace 1 attack from each action with an entire cantrip, Eldritch Blast in this case, for 4 beams each. Finally, we'll use our hasted action to take the attack action once again and replace it with a cantrip, but here we can only make a single attack, and we'll be going by the interpretation that this extends to any cantrips used to replace this single attack. So here we'll be casting Poison Spray, which is the hardest hitting single attack roll cantrip in the game. This brings us to a total of 20 attacks in a single turn, each of which adds 54 damage on average from Conjure Minor Elementals. So, on average, disregarding critical hits, accuracy, or resistances, if we fire off everything, we deal a casual 1,267 damage. 1,080 of which is thanks solely to Conjure Minor Elementals. Even if we said that we missed half of the attacks, that's still more than 600 damage, which is absolutely insane. There can be no doubt that someone screwed up royally when designing Conjure Minor Elementals, and I don't understand how this spell exists in the way that it does. However, the CHRONURGY Wizard is broken enough to elevate the most broken damage combo in the current rule set of Dungeons & Dragons, and that is kind of impressive. Alright, that was the CHRONURGY Wizard. Definitely a fun time until it really isn't. Yeah, I have no doubt that this subclass is kinda broken. Anyway, if you've made it this far into the video, then you're a legend and I really do appreciate you. Would you want to see this subclass in a game, even if only for a one-shot or something like that? Also, would you rather have an overpowered broken subclass that you're not allowed to play, or a mechanically broken subclass that doesn't function properly but you are allowed to play? But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.